Imbalance IT Solutions provides a unique consulting approach to transform your organization's data, cybersecurity, and hybrid cloud environments. We would like to welcome you to our podcast series we call The Balancing Act, discussing complex digital transformation. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hello, listeners out there. This is Ryan O'Halloran, VP of Security Strategy here at Imbalance, bringing you episode 6 of the Balancing Act podcast series titled The Rise of the Enterprise Browser. Today, we're going to discuss a revolutionary way to address the challenges of securing the workforce internet browser, which was foundationally designed for consumers and not the secure and scalable use of enterprise web applications. I have here with me today special guest Jason Trunk. Jason is the Field Chief Technology Officer at Island, a leading enterprise browser solution on a mission to redesign the way we do business on the web. Jason, good morning. Thank you for joining me. Let's kick off here with a little background on yourself and what led you to join Island.
Hey, Ryan, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. Well, obviously, Island is just amazing technology, the ability to do something that's really never been done before, which is to secure the real endpoint. And today, that real endpoint is the thing that we use all the time to get to our cloud resources, to get to our internal resources, basically to present all of these applications, and that's the browser. My background is usually performance management inside of a browser or even server-side performance management for companies like AppDynamics and CA and Big Panda and some of these others. And I've also done some work with JP Morgan Chase as an executive director there, looking out for observability and monitoring and those types of things. So I've had some practitioner experience, but today I'm pretty much the tip of the spear for introducing this technology to the world.
That's awesome. And that's a perfect segue, because with this enterprise browser thing, right, it's a newer concept, yet it's something that we're so familiar with. And I was having a discussion with somebody about this the other day. It's so funny that when we move to web apps, right, we think about, oh, well, now our most important app is on the web, but every app comes from the browser that we access on the web. So obviously this is a means to an end. It's extremely important, and something that we're trying to protect against. So tell us a little bit about what is an enterprise browser designed to do?
Well, we can think of it as a browser. That's obviously how we came to market. We're turning into more of just a real workspace for the end user. And you think about what CIOs and CISOs care about, especially the CIO. You take a CIO, they're caring about end user experience, right? They don't want to add any friction between IT and the business. And a CISO, unfortunately, has to add that friction, quite often. They're adding tools, they're adding, things to jump through, virtual desktops to log in just to get to your email, agents to put on your personal machine and those types of things.
The burden to bear for security, right?
That's right. That's right. It's just kind of the way it's been. And at this point, and by the way, that was very necessary when we had thick native applications running on a desktop. Because those thick native applications, they needed either a way to get back to the servers, at the corporate office, right? So VPNs. They needed protection against malware and folks getting onto that computer and logging into those super secret applications and that kind of thing. So we needed, antivirus, and we needed EDR and XDR and those types of things. As we evolved, though, we started to need, more complex, more sophisticated technology like data loss prevention agents. And oftentimes we'll try to do that at the network level, or we'll try to do it at the OS level. And so, the whole notion of an enterprise browser is, what if that end user compute workspace has everything built in? It has natural, ingress into your network that's deliberate. For those that need access to a certain app, they get just that access, that has the protections around it, within the browser to scan for malware and to scan for sensitive data types and those types of things. And so, yes, it's built on the Chromium framework, which is pretty much the standard today for all web browsing. That's where all the development is done these days.
Yeah, whether you're Edge or Google Native or the Purist or whatever. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. And even these Electron apps that we see, like VS Code and some of these others, those are built in Chromium, right? So Chromium really is the development standard going forward. And so what an enterprise browser is taking that notion of having a supported end user compute environment. And today, with a consumer grade browser, you get some great stuff for consumers. You don't get much for the business, right? It still does the same, decryption. It still does the same rendering and all of that stuff. But we don't have coupons, for the business. We don't need coupons in Edge. We don't need, calling back to Google and Microsoft about our browsing history, right, all the time. So we need it built for the enterprise, and we need support for it. And I ask a lot of CISOs and CIOs, if you look at all the icons on your desktop for all these applications that you bought, for the enterprise, you get support on all of them, but just not for the one that you use the most, which is that browser.
That's so ironic. It's just strange to think about. And I know there's various use cases, right? This could cover. Obviously, it's to make the end user a first-class citizen, right? Keep them secure, zero trust. Doesn't matter what network boundary you're on. But can you tell us some of the use cases that are the most common?
We think about folks that need an endpoint. Well, that's 100% of everybody for every industry, every business on the planet. Our target market is the Earth, right? It's everybody.
It's all.
It really
Maybe
is.
Mars eventually.
Yeah, and maybe Mars and wherever Elon takes us, right? But we think about some of the key end user, use cases that we have, right? So contractors are a big one. Bring your own device is a big one. And the one we're hearing really quite a bit lately is VDI and desktop as a service reduction. So, in the old days, we had VDI, we had Citrix, we had VMware. Well, the old days are still here because we're still using that stuff. And it's, especially, you might have companies that have moved from traditional on-prem VDI to a desktop as a service offering like, Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365 or one of those. But still, these are users that are accessing a desktop in the sky that they didn't ask for. They've got this beautiful MacBook Pro with a Retina display and everything looks good. Everything's fast and responsive. But then they're told they have to log in to some other desktop and do their work just because that one is more quote unquote protected. But the reality is today, most of the time they're just in a web browser in that virtual desktop. So we start to think, well, what would it take to take that browser out of this so-called secured environment and run it locally, run it on these beautifully powered, great displayed machines? That's what the executives, that's what everybody wants to do. Every person within the company would rather do that. So that's the challenge that we took on at Island to build that end user compute environment. So VDI replacement or reduction, contractors. Think about contractors. What do we do for contractors? Well, we get another laptop, we buy it, we load it up with all these agents, and then we ship it to them in the mail, go through customs, all that. How much easier would it be just to download a browser and start working?
Just log in. Yeah, that'd be amazing. Yeah, I get that's the idea. And such a different way of going about it, right? But it makes sense. One of the other things that I hear about a lot, right, is there's been this eruption of zero trust network access and secure services edge, right? All the different things that are out there. And many of these solutions have proxies, where they're forwarding you somewhere. And a lot of times for contractors and things like that, they're using what's called RBI or remote browser isolation. And one of the things about browser isolation is it's streaming essentially, right, that browser to them so that you're insulated or virtually air gapped, so to speak, from any of these protections that, or some of these threats that you have. However, there's a penalty obviously for streaming the application. So depending on what the application is, there's a fidelity thing. And there's also some differences between what the capabilities are and how much friction you actually introduce to get somebody onboarded. Could you tell us a little bit about it? I know the differences are subtle, but I think they are distinct enough where it's important to know the differences, because I think one of the things that took me a little while to grasp is that you're not forwarding for these security features anything to a proxy. It's happening natively in the browser. So it's not like I have a client that's redirecting me to a zero trust network that's, global. The security is actually taking place closest to the source. So from an efficiency perspective, from a quality and fidelity perspective, that seems like a have your cake and eat it too.
Exactly. Yeah.
which is really nice.
Yeah.
Tell us about maybe your thoughts on that. And I know there's there's different perspectives and there's some overlap, but I'd love to hear, how you drive clarity to that type of a question.
So SSE and ZTNA, let's start there. So, it came to light that we needed to give zero trust access for certain users for certain applications, usually on fully managed machines. So somebody's running, SAP R3 and they needed to tunnel back into the infrastructure. Well, before SSE and ZTNA, the only option really was VPN, right? So VPN, from a technical perspective, is exactly analogous to you taking your laptop, going to the corporate office, and plugging it into the switch. Layers 3 and 4, it's on the network, it gets access to everything. So the notion of zero trust was, hey, Timmy doesn't need access to everything. He needs access to SAP. He needs access to just that one app. So SSE and ZTNA did a pretty cool thing where, it was an agent at the operating system level that said, hey, let's take this network traffic and make sure it's okay for Timmy to go there, and then we'll route him there, in a secure way. And usually at layer 7, right? So we don't need to necessarily do layers 3 and 4 anymore. We can just get them at the application layer and take them there. Now, today, the challenge with that is most of these apps are not SAP R3. They're web, they're Teams, they're Zoom, they're Slack, all these things we need to get back into our network or to a SaaS provider, right? And so it no longer makes a lot of sense to take the whole operating system network, take it to some third-party network in the sky. And then part of what they do inside there is they try to open up SSL. And this is called break and inspect. And, we see this with, the next generation firewalls, secure web gateways, SASE, ZTNA, even some of the DLP vendors are doing it. And honestly, this has just proved to be a nightmare. First of all, it's not the way the web was designed. To break open SSL, you need a few things to happen. You need to put a certificate on the user's machine, which basically is fooling it to perform a man-in-the-middle attack. And then you have to route them through a proxy, which knows you're fooling it, which is their proxy in the sky, right? And then they have to re-request that request. So basically, your stuff gets broken in some shared network, and it's in plain text up there with a bunch of other customers that are using that same network. So, and then of course, 100 milliseconds later, you might get, directed to where you need to go. The trouble technologically with break and inspect is that we have all these companies that require you to allow list them, to basically take them out of that allow list, right?
Right. The goal is to get to 100% decryption, but the reality is you got these pinned apps that can't substitute the certificates, so they're exempt. Or the penalty for this on there, no matter how widespread the network is, there's just some behaviors, I think, that just don't lend themselves to a very great experience.
That's right. And Microsoft, they tell you never to do a break and inspect with the whole productivity suite of Office and so forth, because it knows it affects the user experience. And
it's interesting because that's where all the pain is, right? All these usually all the exfiltration is going to a OneDrive or a Google personal drive. And at the same time, if we're exempting that, like we're basically exempting the problem.
So let's take that break and inspect for a second from a technical level. We have new things coming, and it's going to make that basically not work. TLS 1.3 is already proving to be a massive challenge for break and inspect. Perfect forward secrecy, even in today's TLS and 1.3, is not fun to play with break and inspect. The quick protocol, that doesn't work. Quantum, probably not going to work at line speed. We've got all these challenges coming down the road where all this break and inspect technology may have an expiration date just because of the way that it works. Now, take the browser, separately. So the browser is not confined to have to break and inspect anything. Now, why is that? Well, that's because the browser is the A in the A and B conversation, right? It is the one that's creating those prime numbers and getting you that secure conversation. So the browser is always going to know what your traffic is. The whole point of break and inspect is to get inside the browser and get inside that traffic and see what website they're going to and see if there's any malware, or open up a file and see if there's any DLP and whatever they downloaded. So here we are at this magical, box that we have, right, called the browser, and all we have to do is ask it. But nobody's built the browser to ask that question yet. And so we never, Island never has to break open or inspect any SSL to do web filtering, web categorization, DLP scanning, file upload, download, malware protection, all of that stuff is just native. And of course, we had to build those modules to take advantage of it.
And that's amazing. It makes sense. It makes sense. Just, the whole the situations you would run into with latency, the situations you'd run into with complexity, the native use of it, and just the familiarity, the intuition of it, all of it kind of comes together there. I have seen that the enterprise browser space, I believe, by 2030, they were saying that the majority of endpoint security is going to be leveraging this as a foundation. Would you agree that we can adopt this that quickly?
Oh, I really think we're already there. In fact, I ask usually when I give talks or whatever, I ask the audience how many people run their business on a web browser today, and nobody really raises their hand. But then they realize by the end of the talk that they already do. They're already running their entire business on a web browser. So, and Ryan, you asked about remote browser isolation. I think that is a space that we tried. We tried a secure quote unquote browser in the past, which is RBI, right? And so, the Fireglasses, the Bromiums, Invincia, Menlo, and some of these others. And that's technology that has a very, very, niche application. Even today, I think there's still maybe a case for a little bit of that. But the reality is, we built this technology when we were worried about Internet Explorer. We were worried about somebody getting in to the iexplore.exe process, which is running on your machine, right, at root privilege. And if they got into that process, they could get to anything on your C drive, and now they can get into your network that you're definitely connected to because you're at the office, right? Well, guess what? Nobody's at the office. Nobody has files on their C drive that they care about anymore. They're all in the cloud. And Chrome, with the Chromium project, the first thing Chromium did was isolate all of those tabs as individual processes that are separate from the operating system. So with all the Chromium code, we've naturally been kind of isolated from the OS. With Island, we take it even further than that. We start to isolate things in the browser, like WebAssembly. Maybe we shut that off, or the just-in-time compiler, or some of these API attack vectors that hackers are using to get inside your browser. We heard recently that up to 1% of all the extensions in the Chrome extension store had some nefarious aspect to them. Extensions are the scary part. Yeah. And so obviously with an enterprise browser, we're monitoring all that extension activity, allowing, disallowing. And in fact, one of the things we do, which is extremely unique, which is to say, hey, these 10 applications, I don't want any extension touching these. Go nuts, install whatever you want, but they're not touching these key enterprise applications.
That's very cool. Yeah, no, and I mean that's the thing, right? There's all these integrations to make everything custom and immediate come at a cost. You have to, you have to give up some level of permission, whether it's reads or identity, integration or whatever it is, and that's only going to continue. It's just like an Entra and Microsoft. The third-party apps there, like all these free-for-all things that are on the side to make our apps do something better together come at a cost.
Yeah. And, I'm not saying extensions are bad. I mean, there's some really great extensions out there, especially the ones that check your grammar and the AI assistants and all the stuff that's coming. But just remember what they do.
It's overlooked.
They're looking at all of your decrypted data. By the way, you spent money and you moved all your data to a cloud. Maybe Microsoft has it in OneDrive or Dropbox or Box.com or wherever your cloud data is. You assume it's secure as it's sitting there in that server, right? You assume it's secure. But then when it comes down in the transport layer, SSL, we believe in SSL. We trusted it. If we didn't, you and I wouldn't have jobs. There wouldn't be this thing called the internet that was as pervasive as it is today. But when it reaches the consumer grade browser, it opens up. It gets exposed. And that data just displays to your eyeballs. Well, that's the same point where extensions can reach in and look at that secured data that you spent all that time and effort to move to that secured cloud location. Yeah. So even something like Grammarly, it can reach in, steal that data, send it right back up to their servers just to analyze your grammar, which is fine. We like that. We like the AI assistance. But just remember what it's doing. It's taking your data and sending it somewhere else outside of your company. And, we don't think about it that way. We just think of it as a productivity tool.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it needs to be thought about differently. How widely adopted do you think I guess taking a step back, right? Folks are just starting business, units are just starting now to adopt SASE, right? They're starting with ZTNA to reduce the attack surface and be able to, like you said, deliver apps to users and not networks to users. There's a variety for those that are decrypting traffic and using these proxies. There's a variety of different services that all get bundled up as opposed to chained in your firewall. Do you think, I guess, how do you think the enterprise browser will potentially change the SASE adoption or the journey for people? Because I think most folks kind of looked at it like, I got my firewalls with SD-WAN, and then I have others that are really good with their CASB and their SSL decryption and their other pieces. And then they're both kind of figure it out together and create one big thing. This takes the whole proxy thing, the
Right.
agent thing
Right.
off the table, and that's like
Sure.
where we were headed, a quarter ago.
Right. Right.
So how do you see this?
Yeah.
How do you see some folks maybe tripping over and taking a step back, or
Yeah.
consolidating
Yeah.
when they become aware of this? You know what I
Sure.
mean?
Yeah. And one of the things you said was, you might have gotten really good at putting CASB and SSE in place and ZTNA. Nobody's gotten good at it yet, right? It's still something that, everybody's struggling with it. It's still cool technology. It's the best we had. If you have a consumer grade browser on a managed machine, it's the best you have. It's harder to do with unmanaged machines. Nobody wants to put a certificate on their personal machine. Nobody wants to be forwarded through a proxy or have a private access agent or anything installed on their machine. That's actually one of the things that the Island browser can help with. We often say, we do ZTNA better than the ZTNA vendors do their own ZTNA. In some cases, especially for BYO, because with the Island browser, you have to log into it, get authenticated. But one of the things we can do is we can send you with that trust anchor, with that certificate in the browser instead of at the whole operating system. So you're still private when you search Google and Chrome and and Edge, Brave and Firefox, all the others. But when you log into Island, you're going to get routed through that ZTNA provider. So we don't necessarily have to replace the ZTNA provider day one, and maybe we never do. That's fine. You may be in love with your Zscaler and your Palos and your iBosses of the world, and that's fine. And maybe you have a 3-year deal. But the reality is, we're going to make that experience even better by going through Island, especially for BYO. So I think the longer term play is for companies that are cloud native, cloud first companies. This is a no brainer. Create that closed loop system direct to their SaaS environment, right? You can't get in, let's say, once you have turned on a conditional access switch, let's say for Entra ID or an Okta authentication policy in Okta or PingFed or whatever it might be. You can no longer log into your Outlook, into your Excel, into your Teams unless you're using Island, because we're blocking out, they are blocking out all of the other browsers. So kind of that first step is to integrate with your identity provider so the browser becomes a first-class citizen like it should have always been. And then you start to create those closed loop systems with policy that says, hey, maybe contractors don't get to download all of our files from OneDrive or SharePoint. Maybe they can use Teams, but we're going to scan the data as it goes in and out to make sure there's no DLP. So, we have folks that are transitioning from, ZTNA vendors and SSE vendors directly to the browser. A lot of folks are not happy with their current vendor. Others they're kind of okay with them and they're sticking around with them. So it just really depends on the path that we want to go. Now, DLP is another area. We got DLP built into the browser as well. And so let me ask you, Ryan, data loss prevention. We did all these agents, we did break and inspect technology, lots of vendors out there, they're looking for keywords and trying to prevent certain things. But as soon as that data is decrypted in a browser, that's the time we need to start worrying about it, right? So what do we do then? Well, nothing. We do nothing. We wait for it to fall out of the browser as a download or a cut, copy, paste, or a screenshot, or somebody takes a camera phone and takes a picture of it. Those are actual examples of data being lost. But let me ask you this: if there's no data there, let's say we blank it out, a social security number shows up in the browser, but we never show it because we're an enterprise browser. If the data is never there, is there any loss to prevent? Right. So that's kind of that first step is, wow, now I've got access to this presentation layer. This changes my whole DLP strategy. because I can literally just make it invisible, have it never go anywhere. It's never copy and pastable. And in the case where I do need to see it, I can create application boundaries around it and say, hey, this data can go within these 5 apps and nowhere else.
That
So
sounds like the magic of inline DLP agentless, because you got
so
control almost over that presentation layer, right? Is like that's almost the way that I'm envisioning this in my head.
yeah, well, in line, but again, no break and inspect. But yes, it's in line
Without
because
that, yeah,
right,
without that too.
right,
Without even doing that, I'm not even aware of another way to accomplish that really
it's just
under
not.
that circumstance.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. So now identities are the perimeter, not the firewall, and the network security is the browser. What's next?
Top secret, can't tell you. No, I'm just
Oh
kidding.
man. Yeah, it's Q1
Yeah,
25, right?
yeah, exactly.
Last question for you. How widely adopted is this already?
Yeah.
Who's using this technology? Why do you think more companies maybe aren't aware of it? Because it's not brand new. You guys didn't just come out yesterday. The space is newer, but it's not what I would call nascent.
Yeah.
So it's baked, right? It's working. It's out there. So what are your thoughts on kind of where we're at right now in terms of who's using this
Mhm.
and getting the outcomes that they're being promised? You
Yeah.
know, and how you expect this next year maybe to be a whole wave of new thinking around how we're going to execute some of these things.
Yeah, you mentioned a statistic earlier that I need to circle back on, which was the Gartner. And I think what they said was by 2031, they see the enterprise browser being a ubiquitous standard for end user compute. But what they also said to your question was by 2025, a quarter of all enterprises will have adopted an enterprise browser. And that checks out with what we're seeing as well, because currently today we are installed, in place as a customer in over 20% of the Fortune 100. So over 20 of the Fortune 100. And we are currently in talks and negotiations with over half of the Fortune 100. Now, we don't just sell to the Fortune 100. We sell to the Global 2000. We sell to 500, 200 people organizations. Everybody needs it. So the market is there. As far as the industry, we're all over the map. We have, the largest banks in America, most all of them at this point. And when I say all of them, 8 of the top 10.
Yeah.
We have the largest airline in the world. We have largest hotel chain in the world with over 600,000 endpoints. Just all kinds of different industries, retailers. Also, healthcare is big. Think about healthcare. That's where you and I care about end user experience, not our end user experience, their end user experience, because their back is turned to us while I'm on the
Yeah.
operating table. They're trying to log into Citrix and get something done. And that's a 45-second delay. Or, they improvise a badge in and it takes 20 seconds to load up their screen. What if that was just a browser? What if they badge in and boom, they get this instant, beautiful patient chart with PHI removed for those that don't need to see it? That's a great industry for us right now, especially because I heard a statistic the other day is that if you go in for a 5-day hospital stay, just like a routine bypass surgery, your patient record gets touched and exposed over 230 times. 230 times. These are different people, the all the different folks, the therapists and the nurses and the doctors, and they 230 times your PHI, your patient, private healthcare information gets exposed. And the thing with the enterprise browser is that we can soft redact that data. We can make sure that data doesn't always need to be there. It might be on the chart because the application sent all of that data, but we don't need to show it all the time, right? So just little things like that. And these are risk and compliance areas that have just never really been touched before, and represents kind of new areas of opportunity for us as well.
Man, Jason, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I know we're running out of time, but this was a wonderful conversation, and it really is a disruptive conversation. Clearly, the biggest, baddest, businesses that are out there are already trusting this thing, and it's something that we definitely need to pay attention to as CISOs and directors and and owners and everything else. Is how do I, with the least amount of friction, make sure that I'm actually still securing my workforce. And very rarely do we, again, have our cake and eat it too, right? So
Right, right.
I think it's promising. And that's really great. And love what you guys do. I would say to everyone listening out there, Imbalance and Island can assist you, right? We can help you define that journey to your secure workplace. We appreciate your listening. Welcome you back to check out our next episode each month. And until next time, stay safe out there in the cyber world.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, everybody.
Inbalance IT Solutions wants to thank you for listening and invite you to join us for the next episode in our podcast series. Remember, Inbalance IT Solutions can help you transform your business's technology, and we welcome you to reach out to us for more information on our website at inbalanceit.com. See you on the next one.